Williams Architect, we have Kim and Andy. They'll be doing the presentation. I know they have an introduction slide, so I'll let them kind of get to it. But they'll be open for questions and stuff during the presentation. So
Thank you.
without further ado, we can.
Welcome. Thank you for coming out tonight. The floor is yours.
Good evening, Mayor, trustees, managers Weiberg and Ferrari. I'm Andy Dogan, COO and managing partner from Williams Architects, and your project lead for this, this feasibility study. Thank you, Stevie. So tonight we'd like to bring you up to speed with where we've been since we last gave an update to the full board or to the committee of the whole last October. So we've had some additional community feedback that followed the statistically valid survey that was administered last summer that we want to share with you. And we've started getting into some further explorations of different site locations in potential core programs and even some very, very preliminary looks at how a rec center facility could sort of block and stack on a number of different sites. So we'll just get right into it. I'm going to handle sort of the background information tonight. Kim will get more into the building and site specifics. But as Luke mentioned, we want to make sure that we're answering all of your questions and everything is very clear to you as to what's happening here.
And is it okay if the board jumps into questions during the appropriate slides or anything like that, as opposed to having to go back? Okay.
Please do. We hope most of this is readable. There's a lot of information here, so please stop us. Want to make sure that there's as much understanding as we can put forward. One thing that we realize that we want to emphasize here before the public and in a recorded meeting is that the purpose of this study is merely to investigate the feasibility and engage community interest in such a facility. That is in the entirety of the village's contractual commitment to Williams Architects and our team at this point. We want to, as we were hearing some comments and questions from folks the other night, which we'll get into a little bit more later, it sounded like there may have been some misunderstanding about how far this is going. So I want to emphasize that this is merely a feasibility study to give you as trustees more information about the feasibility and validity of this project should you decide to take it forward. So as Luke mentioned, we have a number of team members working on this project. I also find it important to state when we are in front of the public that this is far beyond an architectural firm coming up with some ideas and some preliminary costs. This is a process that is rooted in financial feasibility and community interest, validated by statistically valid survey data. So in addition to us at Williams Architects, Kim and I will be presenting tonight. We've had Pros Consulting, who you met earlier in the process, to look at some of the foundational need, similar providers, and what should go into a center like this to achieve success and meet community needs. We also had the University of Illinois Extension and Dr. Laura Payne conduct and administer two different surveys. One was a statistically valid survey, which we shared with you some information about last time we met. We didn't quite have the information and the outcomes of the survey that was open to all residents. So we do now, and we'll talk about that tonight. And then we have Hitchcock Design, who's not only a trusted partner of Williams, but a trusted partner of the village, who is helping us with aspects of site feasibility, locations, integration into existing parks, working around improvements that have been funded by OSLED grants and things of that nature. So again, far beyond architects who are just coming up with ideas. It's a really considered process that builds a case and a foundation to assess the feasibility of this potential venture. You've seen this this before in our previous presentations. We're a little bit further along now that we've held a couple different community engagement open houses, and we've started to look at some very high-level site and building studies about what could be in the building. We are here to share those ideas with you tonight. Want to get as much feedback, as many questions as we can. Typically, following this process, a consensus forms regarding a preferred concept or site, or at least you may direct us to narrow it down to a couple different options to continue looking at. We go into more detail in putting together costs for those. Develop the concept, again, at a very high level, so everybody understands what the proposal is, what it is likely to cost, and we're, as of this moment, looking to be back before you next month with those findings. So I mentioned that last time we spoke to you, we had information from the statistically valid survey. Dr. Payne had discussed how that process occurred and the methodology behind the survey. Usually, in our experience, we find that when we administer a survey that asks the same questions as a statistically valid survey to the entire community, if they're the right questions that get the right responses, you'll tend to get very similar feedback as you did for the statistically valid survey. So, and that was absolutely the case here. Results were nearly identical. Almost 2/3 of the respondents to the open survey indicated a need for additional recreation facilities here in Brookfield. 37% of respondents were not satisfied with current recreation opportunities at existing facilities. The most important thing on this slide that I think I want to mention is what the survey says, as Richard Dawson used to say on Family Feud. The highest yes, there is a need spaces were health and fitness spaces, walking, jogging track, gym courts, general program spaces, and group exercise and dance spaces. This is important for me to emphasize because it is this feedback that drove the building program. What you'll see we call the core program for the facility, you'll see some initial ideas for tonight. So again, this program of what's in the spaces directly comes out of community feedback. It is not something that we come up with. It's not something that a consultant comes up with. It follows the feedback that we receive. We also asked the same questions that we did regarding willingness to pay, just in hypothetical scenarios. In general, some very, very strong numbers between people willing to pay and people undecided. In our experience, working on a number of these studies over the years, that indicates a very strong level of interest in the facility, especially when numbers and financial scenarios are put out there, because everything sounds great without dollars associated with it. So we want to make sure we look at that first.
Before you go on that last slide, during the open house, it was brought up that these were build costs, which does not cover the operational costs of the facility. But I believe it was Luke that brought it up, that the expectation, or one of the expectations of the facility, is the cost of operation might be covered by the events and the items being offered, to then that should help suffice, as opposed to increasing property tax to cover operational costs as well.
Great question. And actually, one of the next things our team will be doing in wrapping up the study, the business planning consultant pros that was involved at the beginning will re-engage once we have a direction on or a consensus on the overall program of the facility. Part of our scope and part of our deliverables to the village is to develop a financial pro forma, which will estimate operating expenses and potential revenue. So there are different ways to get to different levels of operational cost recovery through operation of the facility. The easiest way I can describe it without getting into a half-hour side conversation on revenue generation is the more you program the thing and the more you run out of there, the more it's going to generate and recover costs. So that analysis will be part of our final deliverable to the village. And so we will be able to show how not only an awareness of the operational costs of such a facility, but also how it will be offset by potential revenue, which will assist with the tax burden. Any other questions before I keep moving? Great. Also, since we last saw you, we conducted the first of our community open houses about a week after we presented to the board the first time. And this is a little hard to see, at least it is for me. Maybe I need some better glasses, but
We have it in our packets.
you do, great. So you'll see that there was a very high very high interest and statement of need for the spaces you see there. And we also started to ask, absent of any concepts for a building or specific locations on the site, where did the community think this might possibly go? And we had a number of different answers, but Ellert Park and the Village Hall or Kiwanis Park site rose to the top. And in speaking with staff and just looking at this core program that we'll talk about, quite honestly, this core program of around 33,000 square feet, these types of spaces, quite simply doesn't work on any other site besides Ellert Park and Kiwanis Park. So those two sites became the basis for our further exploration. So Kim is going to talk about some of these building core program diagrams, which we're just talking about as very simple ways in which a facility could be organized. But before I turn it over to Kim, I want to reemphasize what's going in here. We've developed that core program of spaces, again, entirely based on community feedback, what we heard in surveys, what we heard in the first open house, what we've heard in focus groups, all of those engagement points up to this point. So here we've defined not only the types of spaces, but the square footage that we believe would be necessary based on best practices, based on, well, in some cases, athletics, that includes a gym space, 2 high school-sized basketball courts, plus the space you need around it is what's driving that. Also in athletics is a 2-lane walking and running track that would either circle the gym or, in one of the concepts, circles a little bit more of the facility. So these core programs and square footages, the core programs come from, again, survey results and community interest. The square footages themselves come from, in some case, facility standards. In other cases, our experience and industry standards regarding the amount of space that is suggested as a best practice for communities of this size for these different elements. So in short, this is what's on the menu, these spaces, these particular sizes of spaces. And I'll turn it over to Kim to talk a little bit more about what each of these spaces mean and some of the ideas to start to organize it. Kim,
Thank you.
Roll, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Nice to see some faces again multiple times coming out to the various engagement activities we've had recently. So yes, I'm going to kind of scroll through quickly just some imagery to go with each of those menu items, just so that when we start to look at the concept diagrams, you'll know what I'm referring to. So for social gathering, that'll be in the yellow on the plan diagrams, and this is not just lobbies and corridors. This is space that's really important in a facility like this for people to run into your neighbor and engage, have a conversation, plan future get-togethers, and even become multifunctional spaces. There can be performance elements in these spaces that you can see what's happening in other parts of the facility and really, again, have a place to engage your neighbors. So that's what we mean by social gathering. Athletics and track is a little more self-explanatory. On the top left, we have an image of what Andy was referring to with the track that might typically circle the gym space. The gym is the space you already have, so putting a mezzanine track in that space is an economical way to get dual function out of that volume. On the bottom right is a more dynamic track that might move through multiple spaces within the facility, give the walker or runner, people on that track, a more varied experience, and we've certainly done both ways. The other images are just kind of showing all the different programming that might happen in a gym space. The next one is fitness and group exercise. This is where classes, group exercise classes, as well as all the fitness equipment would happen in these spaces. General program and multi-purpose spaces. These are going to be a good opportunity for some of that revenue generation in terms of a whole slew of activities. It can be programmed anything from, sometimes you're going to see where we'll show kitchen or cafe aspect next to the multipurpose rooms because you could hold events there that could make use of that kitchen equipment, or you could have cooking classes. There's a lot of crossover between those uses in those spaces. Also can be used for conferences, events, theater, or any kind of performance that a club or program activity might want to put on. So, jumping right into option A. Basically, you're going to see two options for the way these core programs might relate to each other. And this is based on various meetings with staff about how they would see, programs that are already happening and being offered by the village fitting into a new space, synergies between ways those program elements need to relate to each other. So, we're going to see two options. Building option A is a 2-story option. When we get to looking at sites, you'll see that we've, as a way of kind of organizing not a million different options for you to consider, we're looking at the 2-story option A on Ellert Park sites, where it's surrounded by single-story or single-family homes and maybe slightly lower density would appeal. Option B is a little bit of a taller building, and we're looking at that at Kiwanis site. When we get into sites, we can talk a little more about that. So option A, at the ground floor, we would have the gym at ground level. With the big red arrow pointing at the yellow space, this would be your entryway lobby. That could be a double height space. The green control zone is where park staff would be monitoring who's coming and going. And so they want to have kind of eyes on that, the in and outs. In this program option, we've got the general multipurpose space on the ground level, as well as the fitness and group X space. The locker rooms would be in between fitness and group X. There was some mention by village staff that it might be nice if those general purpose rooms were being used for preschool or younger children education to have a separate entry at the end of that corridor for pickup and drop off instead of having to come back through the full facility. So that was part of that dialogue of how this set of program spaces evolved. We would have a main staircase in that central lobby that would take you to the second floor, where you could access the track as a mezzanine for the gym. And on the second floor would be most of the administrative offices with a conference room that could be used both by staff as well as public. And the multi-purpose space, which could be subdivided, could have a movable partition and be one large space or become two smaller spaces. And then that multi-purpose space could have a kitchen cafe off of it, as mentioned, could access a roof terrace, and some general support and storage spaces. We always like to provide some stretch space as part of near the track for people using that space. Any questions on option A before I move to option B for comparison?
I had a quick question around the, I had a quick question around the lockers portion versus restrooms. I saw at Oak Park's new facility that they have just a line of gender-neutral individual restrooms, and wondered if there's been some consideration of how to use that space here.
I think so far we're looking at an overall square footage as percentage of a facility of this size, and certainly it would come down to the village's preference as to gender neutral versus male and female or some of each. We definitely are seeing more family restroom, gender neutral spaces provided, usually on both floors of any given facility today. So I think the first floor, has that BR in the gray zone is bathrooms, second floor.
Okay.
Whereas lockers on the first floor, there would be restroom facilities as part of both.
Great, thanks.
Sure. So this is just to kind of show you how those core program plan volumes could stack and become a 2-story element. And, roughly 32 feet high would be typical for a gymnasium space with that height with the mezzanine.
Did you say there would be 2 entrances for
So-
preschool, or is it?
I can't point at the TV with this. We discovered at the Parks Board. But see, the yellow is kind of an L shape
Right.
at the ground floor level. we have to have exits in multiple, we can't have dead-end corridors for fire reasons. So, but whether you chose to make that an official entrance as well as an exit to the right by the general program spaces in purple, the end of that yellow corridor, that's, you know, up to how the village wants to program and monitor access. But yes.
Thanks.
So option B is, again, as mentioned, going to be a little taller option. So this one takes advantage of the opportunity to raise the gym up to the second floor level and provide grade level parking within the overall footprint of the building. We know that at both park locations that we've studied, or all the park sites, parking is an issue. Everyone has mentioned this at every gathering for both locations. So we're definitely cognizant of that at this early stage and wanted to provide an option where we're not only not taking as quite a large a footprint at grade, but we're actually considering how to add some parking within the footprint. And so this set of programs lays out a little differently in that case where we have a smaller footprint at the ground level. So you'll see this one kind of gathers all of the purple programs, the multi-purpose and the general program rooms all at the ground floor level, as well as the admin space. So they can have their offices right behind control. They're all kind of in one zone. Conference room is all gathered there as well. And bathrooms at this level. But then again, the yellow where we have the arrows coming in and says vestibule, this would be more of a grand multi-story lobby volume that would take you upstairs to the gym level. So on the upper level, you're seeing a corridor between what would be sort of fitness and group exercise on the left and the gym space on the right. So lockers have moved up to this level to be on the same floor with all of those activities. We looked at a couple schemes where the lockers moved to the north end of this, where it says Group X. There's some pros and cons around whether the group exercise space is all in one spot versus spread out in multiple spaces. So those are the kinds of things we would get into in the next round of development. So from the upper level, you keep going up to a mezzanine level, where in this option, we're showing a track that does kind of bleed out from the gym, not staying within that confined space. You'll also notice in this case, the gym, instead of being side by side smaller courts, they're end to end. Still have room for a full-size court. You can kind of see in this plan, the two smaller courts and the larger one in the center. It's just a more linear arrangement. So the track could skirt part of that and then come outside, kind of go across that tall lobby volume and be a dynamic feature. And then around the outside of the fitness spaces, you could either look down into those depending on how we stack the volumes. And then you could go up yet another few steps up to a roof terrace above, that would be located above the fitness spaces. So let me show, this one needs the 3D a little more. So you can see how the mezzanine level with the track would kind of provide a parapet around that roof terrace space. So it's not a whole nother level. They're sort of nesting in between each other. This also, arrangement or stacking of spaces allows for the multi-use space to be a little taller in this scheme instead of being pancaked underneath other programs. So that multi-use purple volume on the end can get taller. Again, the lobby can be a nice tall volume. Even the fitness space can grow up a little bit, kind of snuggling in up under that raised roof terrace level. So just trying to look at ways that taking advantage of the moving around of these program spaces and providing parking at ground level can afford some more dynamic volumes as well. Before I move to sites, anything anybody wants to stop and look at or talk about regarding the core programs? They are the same program spaces and volumes in both versions. I will say that the track in this scheme obviously grew outside of the gym, so that's a little bit of added square footage, because before it was within the footprint of the gym, sort of doing double duty. But besides that, if we go back to the original list, this is the same things we're providing in both schemes, just different arrangements, and the addition of the parking on option B at grade.
What is the height differential for each option? Or
So
for
the first option A was 32 feet total. This one, I would compare it to the 42-foot dimension on here. It's a little hard to point. The roof of the track would be 42 feet. So 10 feet taller. The gym that's kind of set back within that gets up to 52 feet potentially, so
Okay.
that would be the total.
How many parking spaces does option B get you?
We have not gotten into that analysis yet.
Okay.
Partly because it depends on, a little bit on which site we end up at.
Sure.
I was gonna say it's between 25 and 30,
Okay.
roughly, with just in that gray.
In that covered area, okay.
The parking entrance portion, you know, basically, this has evolved as looking at it on Kiwanis. If that became the chosen site, certain things about the way that parking is laid out or how you access it from the current parking would probably shift and evolve.
I appreciate the option with the parking incorporated. In a landlocked community where we have such limited open space, I think that that's a very responsible way to be looking at this.
Sure. So in terms of site studies, I'm going to just quickly present the work that Hitchcock has done. We wanted to just show you that starting out, we have looked at multiple sites on both of the park locations. They started by showing us what you have currently at Ellert Park in terms of OSLAD and BAD. I guess they're all OSLAD at Ellert Park. Amenities that we would need to be cognizant of. If we were to site a new building in any of these spots, we would have to either deal with getting approval of moving that amenity or wait till the term expires, so those time frames are listed here. For example, in the blue squares or diamonds, those are recent upgrades that we are not going to plop a building on top of, that people would not be happy. So in Ellert Park, we initially looked at the entire site. We've documented the 500-year floodplain line and started to look at 5 different locations. We've talked about these with the village staff, and it became pretty clear fairly early on. We narrowed this down to 3 sites at Ellert, which I will dig into a little more in depth with you. But we wanted to show you that we did zoom out and look at all potential places. So what I'm going to zoom in on is the ones that in this are labeled C, D, and B, just to orient you before I zoom in. So basically, there's 2 options that we looked at around the parking off of Elm Avenue. And then we also looked at a location next to the parking just behind the fire station. So just to zoom in, this first option is, has various pros and cons. It has an existing parking lot that we could take advantage of. If this became the desired spot, we could shift the building footprint to recover even more of those spots. It also has possible expansion for parking, and there really wouldn't be any park amenities that we would be losing. There's a trash enclosure at the corner of that parking lot. That's really all we're covering in this diagram. Very little tree impact. In all cases on Ellert Park, we would have to deal with the 500-year floodplain, but that's much more navigable than a 100-year floodplain or floodway, like as we have on the Kiwanis Park site. And then we took those 3D diagrams and kind of put them in roughly in the location just so you could see some comparison. Again, this is a little bit helps to understand why we're looking at the shorter volume when we're talking about Ellert Park based on the nearby houses. The second location was looking at the other side of this parking lot where, again, there's maybe even more potential for parking expansion. In this case, though, the major con would be it would be over a current footpath that's very highly used as a lap kind of around the park. And so we would have to look at how to redirect that foot traffic. But on the pros side, this is further removed from Elm Avenue. So in terms of impact or adjacency to those houses on Elm, you're getting a little bit more distance, a little more setback from the road. There is an existing restrooms, an existing concession shelter right at the edge of this. As you can see, we could determine whether incorporating that concession shelter into the new building and having that as an exterior accessed element is an option, or whether we try to maintain those facilities that are there. And so this is that same diagram 3D option in that location. The third location, and this seems, I'm just going to jump ahead to some of the feedback from the recent community open house that we had this past week. Hands down, this one was receiving the most votes at Ellert Park of the three options. It is very tightly nestled in there amongst the ball fields, and but it would offer, some of the pros are that the fire station doesn't have workout facilities right now, so this would offer them an additional amenity. There is space for extended parking along the existing parking lot. There is a skate park that we would have to be looking at moving. Its time frame is nearly up from the OSLAD grant standpoint, and we're told that it's showing its age. So we've just shown that we're keeping in mind potential other locations for that park here, or we could also consider skate park at another site. And that is showing that option A. One nice thing is that it does provide setback from the parking, more of a little space for an entry plaza, and the green bar is the roof terrace in this scheme, which I'm sure you could raffle off for big money for viewing of the baseball games.
So on this one location, I didn't get to stay for the whole event the other day, but did anybody talk about putting option B in that location?
Yes.
Because then you would have the terrace, and then you could look out at the baseball games, because that's,
Yes, for sure. And originally, when looking at the different buildings versus in which sites, we did have option B in this location because we thought of all the Ellert Park sites, this one could handle a taller building. Again, just to sort of streamline options of building versus site, we narrowed it down. But it does fit there, and we had our little plastic buildings at the community open house that we 3D printed, and we showed everybody, like, you can put this here, you could put it where, either option in either site, and see how it fits. But yes, it would.
I know this might be a little bit out of scope, but is that a possibility that you would put in one of the administrative office, almost like a satellite police location? I don't know, but that's, so you would have people on both sides of the tracks. That's all I was thinking. Just throwing it out there. I know this is out of scope here, but yeah.
Sure, Mike would.
I'm gonna put his office on
But
the
then you
roof
don't have to worry
terrace.
about the train when you're trying to get from side to side. Yes.
So just to cover the same kind of information on Kiwanis, this is that initial study that shows the 100-year floodplain line at the top that you can see the floodway on either side of the river, and then the kind of loopy line below that that dips into the site a little more is a 100-year floodplain that we would have to navigate. The yellow dots are the construction, grant-funded construction of the boat ramp and path down to the river that we would definitely not want to impact. And the purple lavender triangles are various other grant constructions at this site. So again, we did attempt to look at any possible places on this site, and really these were just the two that where we could fit in a footprint, anything like what we're talking about in terms of space. B was quickly not looking very feasible based on the Pace buses that park right along that side of the parking lot, as well as just their turning radiuses and the problems that are already happening in terms of the parking lot and navigation of traffic. So we narrowed it down to A, which, as you can see on that previous site, is the basketball courts and the volleyball courts. So various feedback has come up in the open houses and the park board meeting, talking about, well, those are free amenities right now, so how do we provide that again? We would obviously, if we were doing anything with them prior to their expiration, which is 2030, have to, discuss that with the grant funders and provide that amenity again somehow. So this is how the building option B is orienting itself currently. Sorry, Tim, you don't have a very good vantage point, do you? So to zoom in a little bit, Hitchcock did go ahead and show that Pace drop-off markings that are on the parking lot now. I know it's been an issue at times during big events that gets blocked and the bus can't turn around and get out. The Metro parking arrangement for that lot too has to be considered, but again, this is where we would look at trying to find a way to shrink that footprint at the ground level as much as we can to get access around and have additional parking at the back. Again, this is so preliminary. The building could rotate 90 degrees. If this became the selected site to explore further, the building footprint itself might get massaged quite a bit to make the most use of navigating those parking issues. Again, we do also have to deal with the floodplain. There was some talk about whether having grade level parking go within that floodplain. If we rotated this 90 degrees, that's a little bit more easily mitigated than the building and foundations itself. So those are the kinds of things we would get into at the next stage. Some of the pros, again, though, that have come up both from in the park board presentation as well as the open house last week was in terms of the location at Kiwanis versus Ellert. It seemed that for every good point, there was a counterpoint, of course. But this is located a little bit more closely to economic activity on Grand Avenue, and there would be potentially more crossover from businesses on Grand to people using the facility here, as well as, I know it's been brought up, the future of Village Hall and this becoming what feels like a real municipal campus. While they may not be one building, we certainly would develop any facility on this site with the future of Village Hall in mind. So this is how that option B volume would fit at the end of the parking lot. Obviously, we would create more of an entryway. We wouldn't just drive Pace buses right up to the lovely new volume, but these are things we will get into and study more. Somebody at the open house put a giant X across the ball field behind the building. So I guess they want us to shift it back. We tried to steer clear of the ball fields. We were told that was a no-no. So, and again, just like we showed some of the images of the indoor program spaces, when we're talking about the sites, we would obviously look at how the building is not just sitting on the site, but engaging with it and providing other opportunities for outdoor activities and letting the indoor and the outdoor, support one another. Also, obviously, using the site studies to reinforce the sustainability goals of the project in terms of how we're dealing with stormwater management, which will be a factor at both sites. I didn't mention at Ellert, there is we know bedrock. So stormwater is a real issue. We have to look at that in both locations, as well as utilities, and that'll be the next round of investigation at sites. So, a lot of tiny text on this screen. Maybe you can chime in if I've forgotten anything, but some of the pros and cons that were mentioned when we presented this information last week to the Parks Board. I think, again, I mentioned the potential increased activity for nearby businesses at Kiwanis, and the municipal campus idea. Some of the cons were not wanting to eliminate those free amenities of the basketball court and the volleyball. The parking congestion, as we talked about, and then also just what's if we do this here, what happens with Village Hall down the road, so. Park sites, comments for Ellert were, some people were excited about the idea of offering more community activities that are not just ball field related on the south side of town. Some of the cons were that the LaGrange Rec Center is very nearby and seems like it might be offering some of the same amenities already. There was both opinions on whether Ellert was quieter and couldn't handle this kind of additional activity versus, no, it's already quite noisy with the fire station and all the activity of the ball fields. So those were some of the feedback that we got from the Parks Board. Generally, again, there was preference for the location near the fire station if we were talking about Ellert Park. And then at the open house, again, we did kind of that live surveying of everybody that was there, and all of this this presentation as well as that survey are being posted on the village website, so people who weren't able to come to the open house can still see what we talked about. We talked with a lot of people about telling their neighbors to go check it out and fill out the survey. So just like we did with the first open house, you saw just a couple pictures from that survey. We did the same thing. We posted it online later, so people that were not able to come to that first open house were still able to take that survey later. So we have all of that data, and again, at the time, that evening, you can see the results. Generally, they like building option B. Of course, 27% said they need more information regarding price. And they generally, 69% were choosing Kiwanis Park, whereas 23% Ellert, 8% none of the above. But if it were at Ellert, they were also largely leaning toward the location near the fire station. And that is where we are at this point.
Thank you, Kim. So a lot of information tonight. I think what we want to do, just in terms of next steps, we certainly want to take this opportunity to answer any questions, hear what comments or concerns you have. If there's anything else we need to look into a little further. But normally the next steps in this process, we tend to hear consensus move towards a particular site in a particular direction, or maybe two different alternatives to look at. As we mentioned, the next steps will be to give those a little bit more definition. Again, this is just a feasibility study, so we're not going to see shovel-ready drawings and renderings as part of a study like this. But we want to give a little bit more definition to what this could potentially be, so people understand the architectural impact and the scale of the facility in a little bit more, I would say, informative a way than those colored blocks and stacks that you see. And as I mentioned at the beginning of tonight, also what we will be looking at with our business planning partners is what we call that pro forma analysis, where we will be looking at the operational expenses of the facility, so utilities, additional staff, everything it takes to operate a community center facility. look at that with potential revenue. Our partners are going to be talking to Luke and Stevie quite a bit about their assumptions. We've already had some of those discussions about potential programming, but how much do you want to program this facility? How many hours do you want to be open? What kind of demand do we see, which of course has an impact on staffing, right? So that's part of what comes next. And what we hope to be able to present to you is an estimate of what we would call the cost recovery of the facility. So a percentage of operating revenue. So this can be, a cost recovery percentage can be anywhere from the 70%, 70 to 80% cost recovery is, I would say, typical for recreation and community centers within this area. We do see some community centers program to 100% or even above 100% cost recovery. So in other words, you're generating more revenue than the facility cost to operate. That is simply a function of the price point of the programming and the extent of the programming that takes place here. So you'll see that's what we expect to present at our next update to you, which is scheduled for your second meeting next month. So that's where we are. I know a lot of information, but we're not quite done yet. So I want to give you all the opportunity to ask questions, give feedback, and give us some help in terms of moving forward. What else you'd like to see, if there is a consensus in any of your minds as to where this might go, or at least help us narrow the funnel a little bit in terms of these options. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the excellent work and the excellent presentation here tonight. This is, the materials are excellent. I guess I'm kind of looking around at the board and I'm looking at, what are you looking for from us tonight? I mean, are we trying to form any type of consensus tonight, or
It doesn't have to be tonight, this minute, but after being presented with the information, we, staff, will circle back to those open house comments, to board direction, and feel free to send any feedback so that we can incorporate it into, we do need to move forward to selecting a preferred option and location, so the pro forma can be done.
Do you need a preferred building option and a preferred location, or a preferred building option at either location?
To either of those would help. To be honest, the building option is probably, in terms of the pro forma and the operating costs, I don't see much, if any, of a operational cost difference between either any one building, whether it's on the Ellert site or the Kiwanis site. Now I say that, but it is possible that a site with a little bit more traffic is going to generate a little bit more revenue because more people may come to it. But other than that, I think that you don't usually see the pro forma for a facility significantly affected by which site it goes on. Now, on the other hand, the two building options, I would expect to see a bit of a different pro forma. Just by virtue of the larger and longer and more interesting track, I would expect that the option B would be a larger facility, so it would be slightly more expensive to operate. However, the uniqueness of it may offset that in terms of programming. There's lots of things that need to be discussed. Will the track be free? Will it be something that has a track membership? What does membership in the facility look like? Those are all discussions that it's easier to have with one concept versus two in mind, as I'm sure you can imagine. But I guess my point is, it's a very long way of saying a different building organization can definitely affect the revenue and the operational costs. So that would change the pro forma.
and that's why I wanted to throw it out to the board, because it's, in terms of trying to build a consensus, or if there's a clear consensus on building or location now. We were presented a lot. We've been updated a lot. Many of us have been able to attend some of the meetings and follow the presentations, but our typical scenario is, we committee something like this and get some input and think about it. And there may be people, you might get public comment from people, coming days or weeks that, might want to factor into
Yeah.
your decision. So if there's a clear consensus, I know it's not a final decision, but if you need more time,
Yeah, this is not I would emphasize, this is not, if something clearly rises to the top for all of you, that's wonderful. If not, please don't feel pressure that this has to happen tonight. Depending on when that's discussed, it may push back our final presentation a month or so. But as we understand it, there is, again, as I opened with, there are no immediate plans to build this thing right after this is done. So another month of deliberation in terms of watching the survey results come back that are currently online for all of you to take all of this information we've just fed you through a fire hose under advisement, and then come back and deliberate and discuss a little further. We're certainly open to that. That's at your pleasure, at your prerogative, and just want to inform you that that may push back a final presentation accordingly, but we see no reason to why this process needs to be rushed at this point, unless you do.
We see if we agree, and then
Can I ask a quick question, though? Well, maybe not quick, but at the commission meeting, we talked briefly about the cost of option B versus option A. Is it fair to say that both are feasible within
Yeah,
the bounds of?
we've asked questions around ability to pay that directly tie to the village's bonding capacity. So whichever, yes, as they are currently shown, it is very likely that option B costs more than option A, simply because it is a larger facility to get that larger track. Having said that, with any project, you set a budget, it becomes your architect and construction team's job to manage that budget and balance that budget reality with as many of the features, both architectural and program, that you need, that you want to have. So the end of this study will end up having, honestly, a cost range for the preferred option, because there's simply not enough information here to have either an architect or a construction company put any sort of definitive price tag on this. We are so early in the process, but either one of them is manageable in some way within the funding parameters that have been asked of the community.
Okay, thank you.
can you explain what the additional surveying that's going on right now and what we would expect to gain from that?
Sure.
And
So what we've done in the case of both of our open houses that we've done so far is we've taken the exact same information that was presented at the open house, put it online. I believe that's on the village's website now, and we've social media'd that. We've also put together that same Mentimeter survey that we had live in the open house as an online survey. So folks will be able to, over the next few weeks, to, if they weren't able to go to the open house, go on, look at that same presentation and answer those same questions. And the nice thing about the Mentimeter platform is that it shows you results in real time. So any of you should be able to go on and either take a look at the results or take the survey yourself, and then afterwards see. It's not personally identifiable, but you'll be able to see which way a particular site or a particular building option is leaning in real time, and that's one of the real powerful things about that platform.
And the reason I asked that question, I mean, if the board is, there's a consensus tonight from the board, or, you know, even close to a consensus, I don't know if it renders that comment period meaningless or anything else. If, you know, board members are prepared to make a decision tonight, it's kind of saying, well, it doesn't matter what comes in on the survey or the feedback, or I know it's not a final answer, but
President Garvey, we have not posted the
Okay.
community workshop survey because we wanted the board to get this information first.
okay.
As an
Okay.
option, I know it does affect timeline. I don't think too much, but we do have another board meeting in 2 weeks. We could leave that open, gather more community input, give the board some time to consume this information and really take a look at it, and we can bring it back for consensus in 2 weeks. And we'd also be able to see the accumulated data from the open survey.
Thank you for clarifying that.
And I appreciate, again, I'm just trying to give the board their options here in terms of, what they decide or what they try to do. So it's up to you guys.
I will say that, from what I heard at the commission meeting and the open house, like they said, option B was a really strong contender, as well as Kiwanis Park, and the proximity to the downtown area is a really attractive feature of Kiwanis Park. And so, I mean, that's the way I lean. I think the parking feature is really positive, because even with potential parking expansion in Ellert Park, I would really rather not pave over green space in Ellert. And so being able to have parking and build over it is something positive, in my opinion. Yeah, that's where I am at right now. But I'm also open to hearing feedback and giving the community people who weren't available to come, the opportunity to look at that presentation and answer those survey questions too.
My thoughts are option B, but at Ellert, in the fire department area. The concern with Kiwanis, it seems like we're shoehorning it in there. And as much as we have some parking there now, obviously it creates an issue with Metra if we can't use that parking for both. In terms of Kiwanis, I would be concerned about the overall negative impact on the look of the area, because it changed it drastically from, I certainly always thought the Kiwanis was our much more serene, quiet park than Ellert was. But that's my thoughts.
After seeing the massing study, I have some definite opinions on this, but I wonder if there's no problem with waiting to hear what the rest of the community has to say. I think I would like to hold off on sharing those opinions until we get the rest of the information.
I'd love to give a couple more weeks to get more community input as well, but I'm also leaning similar to Trustee Ketchmark, of, like, it feels like the Kiwanis parking lot is trying to parking lot everybody's things. The farmer's market, the baseball games, Metra, and then trying to have a performance or another thing that you're inviting a lot of people to. I think you'd have to do a lot of extra scheduling to make sure that you were parking everybody appropriately when having any sort of event. But I understand the lure of putting it there. I also agree it's kind of like the Oak Savannah and the creek, and it's very serene, and to put a 52-foot building there seems very, it seems big for that spot. But that's how I'm kind of feeling about it, is the fire station area away from kind of the neighboring houses, and either option A or B in that spot, but leaning toward B. But I'd love to hear what other people have to say. My main concern is the over parking and over programming of those parking spaces in Kiwanis.
I prefer option B by the firehouse. That's my preference, because then you can expand parking. The other options in Ellert, that parking lot can't even hold today the baseball and the soccer, et cetera, the existing parking lot. So having it over by the firehouse, I think, makes a lot more sense. I do love option B. I came to the open house, and I spoke with Trustee Nitamatsu about my opinion if we did it in Kiwanis. And if we were to do it in Kiwanis, my preference would be it wouldn't just be a community center. It would be a replacement for Village Hall as well. You would combine it all into one building at that end, raise this building or demolish this building, and that you would expand the parking that way. And then you would have a new Village Hall Police Department, all of that in one building at the other end. And then all of this going forward, including this location where we're sitting in today, would be gone. And that would then be able to house your parking. So if I were to do anything in Kiwanis, I would have one big facility incorporating all of it, and then you can expand the parking that way. And you can have the building with parking underneath it, option B or whatever, but you would be able to expand it to include the police and the Village Hall needs. And then then I would be open to Kiwanis, because other than that, I feel the same way as trustee Kaluzny, that there's no way you can house that much parking when you have a Little League game. Oh, my goodness. And then I couldn't imagine trying to park here and have it in a community center as well. So if I were to do Kiwanis, I would incorporate all of it into one location, knock down this building. But my preference is, then I would go to community. If we're not going to do that, then I would be the option B by the firehouse.
Yeah, long-term, and, having been involved with this for quite a while, that would be my preference too, if it was to incorporate this. We've all talked about this building for many years and the needs that we have here to both modernize and to expand, especially for the programming downstairs and the police. So I'm with you on that. I love the idea of centralizing it, Kiwanis, and I think that would be the ideal thing to do, which of course changes the scope of this. And I agree also with all of the other activities going on here. I mean, just the farmer's market and the crowds and the cars on the weekends. I mean, just that alone is kind of overwhelms this space. So I do like option B. Option A looks great to me too. Option B works. I do like the fire station location. I do have one concern. What about, is there any impact on the fire station in terms of being able to get in and out and not being disrupted by other traffic in that area?
It would be a completely separate driveway, so we wouldn't expect an impact, other than people coming in and out of the center. But we found ways our firm works on a number of fire station projects as well, and we've found ways to mitigate competing traffic.
Okay, yeah, that would
if-
just be my only concern there. Okay.
So can we put the survey up quickly, and then, it's 2 weeks exactly, we have 2 weeks exactly to the next meeting?
Can I ask the implications, though, of trustee Cote's proposal? Because I think that is, I heard that at the open house as well. I think some folks maybe marked it over Village Hall with a marker. But what would the impact of that kind of scope expansion be on this particular project?
We did ask Williams that in the very initial stages. We're talking about community center space. Let's talk about municipal space in addition to the feasibility of that. I will let Andy speak to the financials of that, but it turns, our 25 million bonding capacity into a $60 to $100 million project, which is not financially feasible to our bonding capacity. And for the purpose of this study, we refocused back to community center.
Yes, that's, we've heard as part of this, study, the desire, and very understandably so, to consolidate all of the needs of the village, public safety, government, and recreation and community space into one project. We did, based on communities of similar size, run an estimate of space needed for Village Hall and Police Department. It runs around another 20,000 square feet. Looking at what we're looking at is a 34,000 square foot community center project, increasing that by another roughly 70-75% does start to get into numbers that, as we understand it, exceed bonding capacity right now.
So that means, Tim, we're keeping the wood paneling a little bit longer?
Makes sense.
Here
we
We're
go.
keeping the wood paneling till May, at least till May.
All right, well,
We
let's,
talking a color logo or just one color like that, Tim? What do you think? What species?
And I will say, there is something to be said too, to separate, even though, it's in theory a wonderful idea, but there's something also to be said for separating those types of services that are provided and, right, and maybe offering different kinds of innovation and such. So it could be another future project and do some other upgrades in
Yeah.
between.
What I would say as the leader of our municipal sector, and we work on public safety in village halls all the time, there are certainly precedents for this kind of what I would call a civic center campus, where you incorporate many of these facilities. When you get to a tight site like this, though, there are even more things that push against each other. And one of those, quite honestly, becomes the character and the typology of a community center versus a government center, which can have a synergy, but I think most people think of each of those different types of buildings as different things with different feels and a different aesthetic. So that would be one of, I think that's a solvable challenge, but it is a challenge.
I had one more question
Sure,
just about
absolutely.
what's included in the pro forma. I know one of the staff roles we don't really have right now is like a facility manager or like a building operator. It seems like a facility of that size would need someone making sure it was working right all the time. So whether that's a shared position with all of the facilities or if it's multiple, I just wanted to ask if there's like additional staff positions included in there.
Most of your operating costs of this facility or any facility are staff. So our planning consultants will be going through those, their experience and their assumptions with Luke and Stevie here to talk about what they recommend. In some cases, there are different options for managing and operating a recreation center. It's in the park and recreation world, there are some communities or some park districts who will completely turn the operation of a golf course or a facility over to a private company. Don't see that as much on the community center side. That happens more in golf, but there are all kinds of ways to kind of look at operation, whether through your own staff or contracted services for part or all the operations. So long way of saying those are discussions yet to be had, but yes, the operational costs will bake what it takes to keep this facility maintained and who is doing that in some way in there as a placeholder.
Thanks.
Well, let's get this survey up. Let's get the additional input there. We may get additional public comment tonight from the audience when we get to public comment later on this evening. And just in general, we're going to be out and about a lot the next couple days and weekend with a lot of events. I think you'll get some feedback that we appreciate and comment on. So let's do it that way.
Yeah.
Thank you very much again for
Thank you,
the excellent presentation and throughout the whole process. It's been great. And thank you to all the members of the public that have been coming out and sharing their input. And I hope people will do the survey available to give us even more. So.
Thank you, Mayor. It's been a great level of engagement we've seen from your community, from all of you, from your park board. And it's really good to see people coming out to these events and responding to online surveys and the surveys you've had before. It shows the passion that the community has. It shows a need, and it shows the questions that are out there that the process needs to answer. So appreciate the opportunity to be part of it.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you.